Hello there, friends. Kim here. Today, we're diving into something that I call the podcast growth season. So, every September, podcast listenership just naturally increases, and people are coming back from summer. They're really craving their routines. The kids are back in school. People are getting back into like their life. The days are shorter and they're looking for new shows. They're looking to add more of something to their lives. And as podcast listeners, they are on those podcast players searching for them. And that surge of new listeners and new downloads are going to happen from September right through until about November 16, 17, 18, right before the Thanksgiving holiday. So we've got a great number of weeks, 2.5 months or thereabouts, to really nail this, to get this and encapsulate this particular surge of new listeners. So, if you are looking for more downloads this holiday or this fall season, then now's the time to get that all prepared and set up. So, what are we looking at? I am Kim Parkinson, and I am a podcast growth coach, host of Podcasting for Spiritual Women. I'm a podcast producer and a speaker, and I have been helping podcasters with their shows since 2020. And I have also had my own cable TV show where I was executive producer. I absolutely loved being in front of the camera, as you can see, and also behind the microphone. So I have really been a part of this space for quite a number of years. My TV show was in the 2018, 2019 realm there, area there. So, and I wanted to also drop this quote in here today. The future depends on what you do today, because every small little tweak that you do will actually help you long term. Your podcast is evergreen. And as long as you are setting yourself up with some of these tips that I'm going to show you today or tell you about today, you're going to be discoverable long term. So, even though there's this growth season coming up in September through November, it happens again January through June. So we want to really make sure that we nail some of these down now, see that growth start, and then continue to skyrocket in the new year. So, are you ready to get started? Let me share some more. All right, so why does this happen every fall? And this is very similar to January as well, but September, people are back into those routines. They're craving something new, right? They've had a hectic, crazy, kid filled summer, right? And they are just looking forward to just having just that one little bit more of content. They're looking to learn, they're looking to explore, they're looking and craving routine. And this is a perfect time for them to be able to find your podcast. And again, this surge happens now through September and goes through about November 15th. It dies down a little bit in December and then comes back with a vengeance starting in January through June. So it's great time to get all of this, get ready for this amazing surge that's going to happen. All right, so I have a little story here to share with you. So I used to own a craft store, a brick and mortar craft store, and I taught anywhere from, oh gosh, probably 8 to 20 more classes a month. And while I owned this, I also did all of the ordering and I went all to all of the different conventions and everything. And what I noticed was that August repetitively was one of our more popular months. Now, I had the craft show, typical for me was in July. So I would be shopping for holiday stuff in July, and then it would start to come in, and people would start also coming in for those items. They're prepping early because they're craving that routine. They're craving that back to normalcy. And so something as simple and easy as maybe coming into the craft store and buying holiday paper to start making their cards or their scrapbooks or whatever it might have been, they're really, really just internally, they just want to get back into those routines, back into that. And to be honest with you, this really kind of reminded me because podcast listeners are absolutely no different. Because again, we're human and we're craving that just routine and that normalcy of life. So by September, we're like looking for new shows. We're just looking for more knowledge, and we're just looking to take that next step. So my question now is your podcast ready to be discovered? And that's the big question here, right? I want you to sit with it because you really need to make sure that you can nail down just these three different things, and you're going to see some growth. So you ready? All right. First one. The first one I want you to do is I want you to check your podcast name. I want you to make sure that it is clear and searchable. It needs to start with a podcast. I'm sorry. It needs to start with a keyword rich word, meaning if you are starting your podcast with get rid of it. If you are starting your podcast with your name and you may not be really well known, I mean, like Mel Robbins is well known. We all know this. So that's not even a question in the mind. But if you are just Kim Parkinson, you may not be very well known. And so you may not have all of that oomph behind you for people to be able to search for that. Although there is a way in the podcast players for them to also be able to search you by your name. So definitely put your name in where it says the host. Next, I want to know whether or not your podcast actually speaks directly to your listener. So while you started with an SEO rich keyword, or even if you're like, maybe it's not completely SEO rich because I didn't do all the research, which is fine, it needs to be a keyword about what it is that you talk about. Because let's face it, even though we may want to create all of those SEO rich keywords, the thing is that we may not have the podcast that is really mainstream. So, as long as you are trying to find your ideal avatar, your ideal listener, and those keywords are something that they use on a regular basis, that is what is more important. So, make sure that you know who you are going to be speaking to every week and that you put that in your show name as well. Now, I have a little pro tip here about this. You can have a very, well, not very, but you can have a pretty long, lengthy name to your podcast, a lot of different search terminology within the name. And you can have a shortened version of that you speak to. So if you say that maybe your podcast is my podcast is podcasting for spiritual women, but if I wanted to, I could name it in the hosting platform podcast tips, strategy, and tricks for spiritually aligned women entrepreneurs. I could definitely put all that in, all those different keywords that people are searching for, and then just leave my cover art in my intro as podcasting for spiritual women. So on hosting level, you can have a more lengthy name that has a few more of the keywords that you want in it. So just a pro tip there. All right, now, number two, we're going to be looking at your podcast description. Now, this is not the description of each of your episodes. This is actually the one that you put in when you first do your settings, probably somewhere in your hosting platform. You put in the name of your podcast, and underneath that, it said something like, "What is your podcast about?" right? And this is your podcast description. This is where you're going to explain why your show matters. You're going to be using keywords in here, and you're going to show some type of transformation. Now, I have a tip to how to do this. The first paragraph should definitely state in there and start with your keywords. SEO keywords are perfect, or keywords specific to your niche if you are not big into the SEO. But definitely start with keywords and start that and have several in the first sentence if you can about what you're going to be talking about. And then the second sentence should continue with that, as well as maybe the third or fourth sentence. Don't introduce yourself until the second paragraph. And then when you do talk about yourself, I want you to start with your name and then what it is that you want to be known for, what it is that you do. So if you are a sales coach or if you are a coach of some type, I want you to put that right after your name. And then you can write a little bit more about yourself and what it is that you might do. And then the third paragraph is maybe a little bit more about what kind of transformation that they're going to have. What kind of episodes are you going to bring to them? This is when you really start to talk about like each individual type of episode. Like you can kind of more go into depth there about we're going to be doing interviews and solo, and occasionally I'll do a coaching episode, and we're going to do integration episodes, and all of those different pieces there you can actually have right there in the third paragraph. Now, I have another pro tip here for you, and that is if you can figure out 5 to 10 Google style questions where the answer to those questions is your podcast name or an episode you're going to be bringing, I would just add those right to the podcast description as well. Usually, I say something along the lines of this podcast explores questions such as, and then I list these questions. So they don't seem really disjointed just right there in your description. But the beautiful part about that is that then you can use any one of those for an episode in the future. Now, the third one that I'm going to be talking about is your actual episode titles, right? So these are going to start again with keywords. They can be pretty lengthy if you want them to be. I usually have a pretty lengthy one and then try to chop down different words out of it to make sure that it is something that is findable for sure, but I also really like it in the podcast apps when it scrolls, it doesn't like have the dot after it. Like it'll scroll and you'll see the whole title. So I try to keep them to there's not really a character limit, but I will just suggest that you'll be able to see how much or how little. And that's really up to you. I prefer mine to be a little bit on the shorter side, but that's up to you. If you really want them to be quite lengthy, you're absolutely welcome to do that. Now, you want to make sure that they're easy to understand and that really they're speaking to your person, your listener, and whatever their pain point is, whatever their pleasure point is, whatever it is that they need to hear from this episode, that is right there. So when they're in the podcast player and they're searching for the topic that you're discussing, yours is going to be one of the ones that pops up on the top because you just had an episode about this or your episode is this. All right. So don't go clever on any of these because you'll just lose listeners. So make sure it's keywords in there. I will say, here's my pro tip for this one. If you have an episode that starts with how to, or you have an episode that starts with the top 5 or top 10, whatever. Those are super popular. People love it when you have either a number of the top 5 or you have something about a how to or something like that. They love that. So, those are my only 2 that I would suggest that there's a little deviation from the keyword rich there. All right. So, recap for today. We've got a little checklist, right? You're going to look at your podcast name. And again, You don't have to change your cover art. You can just go ahead and change it host level so that it is easier to be found. You don't have to change your intro. You don't have to start saying something different in your intro. But unless, of course, you change the name completely, then you might want to think about that. But until you do that, you want to just have that host level name, and then you can always change your cover art later if it really starts resonating and people start knowing you as that. And then we're also taking a look at your podcast description, making sure that you have at least 3 paragraphs, one with a ton of keywords. Bam, right out of the box, right there in the front top one. And then the second one, introduce yourself and what you do, who you are, like right there, like Kim Parkinson, podcast growth coach. Boom, right there. If you have a co host, the next paragraph should just be about that co host. So people ask me about that too. You guys can duke it out over who comes first. Maybe do it alphabetically. And then the third or fourth paragraph, if you have a co host, the third paragraph would be just more about what they're going to be expecting in the show and what kind of episodes you'll be bringing them. And then those Google style questions, right? And then lastly, it is the episode titles. Now, pro tip on the episode titles, and actually pro tip on all of this, you can change them at any time. You can update them every 3 months. You can do so many fantastic, wonderful things. They're not one and done. It is, you know what? I've had this description for 3 months and I'm not being found by this type of person. Or maybe I've had a lot more episodes about this and I really want to pull that in. So you can change it. You can change it anytime. I started my podcast on June 19th of this year. And I think by July 19th, I had already changed the description because even though I had it in my head how I was going to do it, things tweaked, things changed, and I tweaked my description to more suit what the direction I was headed in. So you can change your episode titles anytime. You can change your description anytime, and you can change your podcast name anytime as well. It's not going to interfere with how many listeners you have if you do it host level and don't change your RSS feed and all of that. So, all right, don't forget the future depends on what you do today. So let's go on. One more slide here. I just wanted to let you know that if you're feeling like you're ready for a tune-up and maybe you're like, you know what, this is great. I'm glad she gave me all of this, but I don't really know how to get started. I do have a free podcast growth clarity call. There's a QR code right there to that particular link. It is free. If you have a podcast, you just have a questionnaire that you fill out. I do a little bit of research. We have a little chit chat. I give you a couple of different tips that maybe you could use to get going. And then, you can just go on and do your own thing. Or if you want to work together, I will then offer you something that may be as simple and easy as a 14-day strategy where we get things going and just tweak a few things. Or if you want more of me, I have a couple of other longer style packages as well. So, thank you so much for joining me today. I so appreciate you and your time. I know time is a commodity, and I appreciate that you spent the time with me today. So, just go ahead and do those few quick tips and watch your podcast start really growing in downloads this fall and then again next January. So, until next time, I'm Kim Parkinson, host of Podcasting for Spiritual Women and producer and podcast growth coach and speaker. So I will see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.